Check.
Honorable guests, good evening. United Nations General Assembly has designated 13th October as International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. The theme of 2020 is Disaster Risk Governance. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the series of webinars on disaster risk reduction, which is named as Raksha. Raksha is a Hindi word, which means defense. We may manage the disaster, but we cannot manage the disaster, but we can have a strong defense over it. This is the first event of its kind in the domain as industry leaders from different sectors, academicians from eminent institutes like JNU, Jamia, Allahabad University and UK are sharing their thoughts and will try to find out the way the sciences cross-industry culture over the disaster risk reduction. Every day will be an important day, so I request you to join every session. Raksha 2020 is an upshot from joint effort of ERDMP Academy, Fulcrum Group, and CROPC, supported by Healthcom, a platform offering health and wellness for corporate and individuals. Moving further, I would like to introduce today's event and the dignitaries. Today, we will be having Professor Dilanthi Amaratunga as a lead speaker. Professor Amaratunga is from University of Huddersfield, UK, and heading the Global Disaster Resilience Center. And today, she will enlighten us by disaster risk reduction, by precipitation challenges, and way ahead with respect to expertise in Sendai Framework 2014-20. This event will be initiated and concluded with the panel discussion with the speaker and Dr. Rakesh Dubey, who is the industry expert and CEO of ERDMP Academy. Dr. Rakesh is, I would like to introduce Dr. Rakesh a little bit more. He's having 38 years of experience in environment and disaster risk reduction. He served as 16 years as Director of Disaster Management Institute, Home Department, Government of MP, Bhopal. He also worked as a member and chairman of central and state government technical committees, visited various countries with respect to environment, disaster risk reduction related activities. After superannuation in March 2020, he joined as the CEO of ERDMP, which is Environmental Rehabilitation Disaster Management Program Academy. And I will not take no time, and now I hand over to Dr. Rakesh Dubey to take the baton of Raksha 2020. Sir, hand over to you.
Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining this unique program which we are going to start for 6 days. I would like to welcome Dr. Amaratunga from UK, Huddersfield, and I would like to acknowledge her sincere acceptance. She accepted within a while to accept this our invitation. This program, as a coordinator, I would like to say basically this program what we thought for the 6 days is to establish establish some linkages between academia and industry. I understand that in today's time, it is a need that all academic activities should be linked with the industry, and industry should be linked with the academic and research activities. There should not be a separate, approach for research and academic as well as for the industry. There should be a strong combination so that we can get best results. So in the whole program, since it is an introductory session, so in the whole 6 days program, we are having industry leader of the different sectors, and they will share their challenges as well as the way ahead and how we can go ahead with the network. So this is the overall theme of the 6 days program. And lastly, we will conclude with the regulatory provisions. Without regulatory provisions, we cannot achieve our goals. Now, coming to the today's session, I would like to welcome Professor Dilanthi Amaratunga. She basically she is from Sri Lanka, and she is heading there in the Global Disaster Management Center. Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, yes.
And from the UK time, it is good morning. I think that is near about.
Yeah, good morning. Yes, yes.
He has won the Newton Prize, which is a prestigious award of UK. He has more than 400 publications. He is also the steering committee member of UNDDR for the Making Cities Resilience. He is also working with the European Commission, UNDDR. So I would like to welcome Professor Dilanthi.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all. So I will try to share my screen.
Professor Dilanthi, are you audible? Can you proceed, please?
Yeah, I can. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am, we can see your screen.
Okay, and can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay. So I will try to speak slowly so that there won't be any interruptions. If the voice is not very clear, just let me know.
Sure.
So. Oops. Okay, so my talk is today. I was asked to talk about Sendai framework 2015-2030 perceptions and challenges and also the way forward. So Sendai framework is nothing new. We all are very familiar with that, but I just want to reflect on the perceptions and where we are now after 5 years and also the way forward. So for example, at this point of time, we need to reflect on our increasing exposures. For example, our population is increasing and we are adding a lot more housing stocks to our built environment, and also we value and depend on the increasing wide array of products, services and technology, and also there's a lot of economic growth, prosperity and wealth. So in that sense, our various types of exposures are on the increase. And also sort of at the same time, our vulnerabilities also. For example, our population is aging, and also we have a very large migrant population, and also our existing building stock is also aging, with the very old bridges and so on and so forth. And also across the globe, a lot of people are living in increasingly marginal locations. Even in not only in India, in a lot of parts of the world. And also sort of the budget climate is actually not very good. Government and communities have to do a lot more with a lot less. So I suppose take all these risk factors, I think it is fair to say that we have known knowns, we have known unknowns, and we have unknown unknowns. So issues like climate change, changing population, effects of globalization, and also geopolitical and governance environment. For example, I'm sure you have heard about what is going on in this part of the world as far as Brexit is concerned. So this has actually led us to led the international community to come up with several global agreements. So there are several global agreements: Sendai Framework, Sustainable Development Goals, and also the Paris Agreement. Having said that, the basis for today's discussion is around Sendai Framework. So what is Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction? It was actually what happened in 2015. Representatives from 187 UN member states, they actually gathered in Sendai, city of Sendai in Japan, at the Intergovernmental Disaster Management Conference, and they signed off the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. So it actually provides all the member states of the UN with concrete actions to protect development gains from the risk of disasters. So I suppose it is fair to say that the Sendai Framework is a global roadmap for reducing human and economic losses as a result of disasters. And also the Sendai Framework has three fold goals. First one is actually to prevent creation of new risk, and also to reduce existing risks, and also to strengthen the resilience of people and assets to withstand residual risk. These are the three main goals of the Sendai Framework. And of course, as we all know, it sets a 15-year agenda, whereas it actually calls various measures to prevent and reduce hazards. And also it actually puts primary responsibility towards states for DRR. In that sense, I'm very pleased to see all the high-level actions that government of India is taking, for example, headed by the president of, the Prime Minister of India. So there's actually very much the support of the state towards the DRR activity. And another key component of Sendai Framework is it has for the first time included man-made and biohazards. In the past, we only dealt with natural hazards, but in the Sendai Framework, there is scope for slow onset and man-made and biohazards. And also it emphasizes the shared responsibility for DRR with all the stakeholders. So in that sense, it is really good to see a wide variety of stakeholders who are taking part in this series this week. So really speaking, at the end of the day, what Sendai Framework is trying to do is to create risk-informed development, bringing in hazards, vulnerability, and also exposure together. So this is actually the basis of Sendai Framework. And also it provides a kind of a paradigm shift. For example, in the past, I hope you agree, majority of the governments were more focused on how they can better respond to the next disaster rather than preventing the next one. So via Sendai Framework, that there's a paradigm shift allowing or asking the governments to concentrate more on prevention rather than merely responding to disasters. So this shift from focusing on disaster management to disaster risk management is a very, very important direction as far as Sendai Framework is concerned. So basically, Sendai Framework has just one goal: 4 priorities of action, and also 7 global targets. And I will very briefly take you through what they are. And also, in order to achieve these targets and priorities of action, it very much promotes international cooperation and global partnership. We all live in this global world these days, aren't we? I suppose, particularly with even though that we can't travel, we are linking with a lot of people via this online mechanism. So in that sense, global partnership actually plays a key role here. So what are the 4 priorities of action associated with Sendai framework? I'm sure you all have actually come across these, but I just want to reflect them very briefly. Priority 1 is, first of all, in order to prevent risk, we need to get a very good understanding of disaster risk. So that is actually priority number 1 of Sendai framework, getting a really good understanding of disasters. Second priority is strengthening disaster risk governance. For example, without having proper governance procedures, it is very difficult to manage disaster risk. So in that sense, the second priority is associated with strengthening disaster risk governance. And the priority 3 is actually increasing investment in disaster risk reduction. There's no point of us talking about preventing disasters if you're not going to make proper investment. So in that sense, the priority 3 is very much on investing in disaster risk reduction. And the final priority is actually to build back better, that is enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response. So it is actually after disasters trying to make sure that we take that as an opportunity and to build back better. So these are actually the 4 priorities of Sendai framework. Then what are the 7 targets? So there are actually 4 targets linking with reducing impact, and also there are 3 targets which are linked with increasing impact. In terms of reducing impact, Sendai framework wants to have a target about reducing mortality of global population by 2030. And also it wants to reduce the affected people as a percentage of global population. And also it wants to reduce the economic loss as a percentage of global GDP. And also it finally, it wants to reduce the damage to critical infrastructure and disruption to basic services. I think that is a final target which is aimed at reducing the current status. In terms of increasing the current status, they want to they suggest increasing the number of countries with national and local DRR strategies by 2020. So it is actually this year. And also it proposes increasing in international cooperation to developing countries in increasing research, science, policy and practice. And also it is aimed at increasing multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information and assessments. So these are actually the 7 global targets. As you can see, 4 are linked with reducing what it is now, and 3 targets are linked with increasing what it is now. So how does the Sendai framework help us? Of course, it is a commitment to disaster risk reduction approach. I think someone is actually, can all of you please mute your mics? It's very, there's a lot of disturbances.
Yeah, we muted.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. And also, I think it provides guidance to governments on the best advice for how nations should approach disaster risk. And also, it actually have a lot of detailed content with details of goals, priorities, local and national actions. And also, it helps us to benchmark ourselves with other countries, for example, on which we can assess ourselves. Of course, always benchmarking is really important in that sense. And also, I suppose what another important point to remember is, I'm sure we all are familiar with Sustainable Development Goals. It is actually very fair to say that it is impossible to achieve sustainable development goals if we don't address disasters. For example, sustainable development goals heavily promotes resilience and DRR as a foundation for sustainable development. So in that sense, it is fair to say that disaster risk reduction or DRR cuts across different aspects and sectors of development. So in that sense, it is really critical critical addressing DRR if we are to meet the sustainable development goals at each country level. So in that sense, it is critical that we achieve the sustainable development goals. If we are to achieve sustainable development goals, that we meet the Sendai framework targets. So in that sense, because decades of development can just be lost in few minutes due to a occurrence of a natural or man-made hazards. So in that sense, we have to actually link DRR with sustainable development always. So I have actually put a quote from the UN Secretary General here. He has actually said that if vulnerable countries are in a constant struggle to rebuild and recover after catastrophic events, we will never achieve the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. I think that summarizes the importance of addressing disaster risk reduction, which is the basis of Sendai framework. So again, there are some further statistics to justify the importance of DRR in sustainable development goals in terms of number of disasters and the economic losses. So at the moment, the Sendai framework is 5 years old. It was launched in 2015 and we are in 2020 now. Are we on track to meet the disaster risk reduction targets? This is a really good timeline to reflect on that. So what has been achieved, what has been forgotten, and what needs to be done. So let's try and reflect some of the key points. So I suppose I actually sat at the audience when Sendai framework was launched in Sendai in 2015. So it gives me great pride to reflect on what it has achieved. So there are some of the positive things that I want to emphasize here. For example, the first one is, as far as I can see, that there's a change in people's mindset from thinking that disasters are natural. Of course, we need to realize that disasters don't do any harm if they don't actually interact with people. So in that sense, I think there's a change in people's mindset. And also, I suppose there's a change in the conceptual thinking, that there's a lot of emphasis on preparedness rather than only concentrating on response. And also, I think it introduces the international community to identification of risk reduction as the central concern, rather than merely concentrating on disaster reaction. And also, like in India, as I said, India is doing a great job in that sense, having prime minister level support, the role of the states which play in reducing the impact of disaster. So there's a shift in thinking which has actually come forward with the backdrop of Sendai, which was launched 5 years ago. And certain other positive things as far as I can see. Of course, there are quite a lot of positive aspects, but I want to have a kind of a snapshot here. And also, a lot of countries have tried to interpret the meaning of disaster risk reduction in the development context, which is actually very, very important point as far as I can say. And within that, there have been institutional changes and also various efforts towards understanding risk and capacity building. Again, getting back to your own country situation, there are major capacity building initiatives based around various parts of India. And also, sort of, I suppose, a lot of countries, by means of complying with Sendai framework, they have developed roadmaps for their communities and individuals in meeting targets set by Sendai framework. And further progress. I suppose the countries have realized, as I emphasized before, that sustainable development goals and, for example, Paris Agreement and also Sendai, they have common and shared goals. So in that sense, Sendai framework has given countries the ability to reflect on these links. And also, by doing so, countries have managed to optimize their knowledge. And also, at the same time, time, there are a lot of calls for coherence, knowledge and integration to extend these realities. For example, because the countries haven't got funding and resources to deal with these initiatives on individual basis. They want to actually bring everything together and to have common plans. That is one of the positive progression points that I want to highlight at this point of 5 years of Sendai. And then another point that I want to emphasize is, of course, I think particularly at the current stage, there has been a lot of emphasis on how to tackle a problem that is very complex. Of course, at the moment we are facing such a complicated situation, aren't we? Because there's a biological hazard which has an impact towards the entire world, that is the COVID virus, and also there are so many other natural hazards that we need to be mindful of. So in that sense, the framework has given space to countries to think about all the risks that we face today, which are not the risk for 30 or 40 years ago. The things have changed. So and things have become much more sophisticated and which needs an integrated approach. So this is another positive point that I see. And with that, a lot of countries have taken a lot of steps to develop new strategies and initiatives to reduce their vulnerabilities. And also at the same time, there have been a lot of initiatives to develop capacities and country level. So these are some of the positives that I see from the point of view of progress of Sendai so far. So then what are the challenges? So then, but what is the state of progress of the framework 5 years in? All countries, or what are the sort of, it is actually sort of one of the key points that is missing at the moment is still better data, access to better data. I'm sure you all agree that there's a major issue with data. So while, as I have emphasized, progress has been made, better data and information management is needed, and governments need to translate limitations connected with these targets into community-based actions. So in order to do that, there need to be access to better data. And also, how about deep historical record of disasters? At the moment, some countries have access and some countries don't. For example, data provided within 10 years could well be insufficient for providing a broad picture of disasters and risk measures. So in that sense, there's a need for us to have access to deep historical record of disasters, which goes back to centuries, if at all possible. And also there's an issue with status of coherence. For example, we have, as we all know, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, we have the Sendai framework, and we have the climate change agreement. So this actually but these agreements actually holds a lot of hope of integration, coherence, cooperation. These are the keywords that we refer to. However, it is fair to say that so far, the competition for funding and other silo behavior is still very common. We talk about integration, coherence, and cooperation, but still there are gaps between all these initiatives. And also there are a lot of frustrating tension between theoretical coherence and real world institutional policies, which continues to exist when it comes to linking where the conventionally seen as development investments and efforts to reduce disaster risk. I do not know how far you agree with me on this point, but I see this as a major challenge, this lack of integration, coherence, and cooperation across these different initiatives. And the next challenge is how to deal with displaced population. For example, since 2015 until now, internally displaced people fleeing war live in conditions that make them vulnerable to disasters have increased, even though that Sendai framework very much predicted a decrease in displaced population, but it hasn't happened. So increase in displaced population always puts a lot of tension and stress and resources in managing these sort of situations. So that is actually a very much a challenge that I want to emphasize. And another point that I want to emphasize is youth participation in DRR. If you can actually recall, Sendai framework actually had a major commitment to youth participation in disasters. But having said that, there are still some element of mistrust and alienation, which actually acts as a serious obstacle to have a serious involvement of youth in these initiatives. Of course, as you can see, there's a lot of, I think, the middle age and how should I say, the communities who are involved in DRR activities very much actually does not actually include a very good proportion of youth, which is still a kind of an issue that we need to deal with, youth participation in DRR. And also the other challenge I want to emphasize is lack of interinstitutional and multi-sectoral mechanisms for the collection of systemized information. Of course, I think still the silo behavior, it is very difficult to get rid of that sort of situation. There are a lot of institutions still work on its own without having multi-sectoral thinking. So there's lack of coordination. There can be, I suppose, so many national entities, so many NGOs, and so many UN agencies. They work on their own, and they have their own sort of priorities and guidelines. And also, to me, another challenge is that there's a need to go beyond the Sendai targets. Of course, we have the targets, but we really need to go beyond Sendai targets relating to climate emergency and failures of economic development. So we really need to think outside the box also. While actually meeting the targets of Sendai, we need to think about outside the box and to think about climate emergencies and failures of economic development. And then how about relationship between civil society and the state? I'm sure some of the colleagues who are taking part today representing NGOs will have might have the same view. For example, I see that as I really like this quote: the relationship between civil society and the state has been called one of the fierce friends and the friendly enemies. So I think I very much like that quote. So, but the Sendai framework is very much committed to mobilizing the knowledge and skills of the local people, but it is still to be seen how well it has improved since 2015 in dealing with the governments and also the status of NGOs and other civil society organizations, and also faith groups from the decision-making loop. So I see this as a challenge at this 5 points junction, 5-year junction. And also another issue is, I suppose, we always talk about the role of science and technology in DRR. It has been emphasized very well in Sendai in 2015. But to me, there's a lot of things have happened so far, but to me, there's a lot more needs to happen to meet the Sendai framework targets. And also the knowledge has to be at the right place to get used. So in that sense, I suppose a lot of people refer to this as last mile problem. For example, there are sophisticated systems of satellites, radio transmitters, computers, and so on and so forth. But how can we get the warning to someone in a village on the coast with no mobile phone coverage, no radio, and maybe a bicycle? And so that is actually the challenge that we face from the point of view of science and technology usage in DRR. So in that sense, I want to emphasize this as actually not the last mile problem, actually the first mile problem. How to use local knowledge to design warning systems. I think we really need to get this balance right between the last mile and the first mile. So what next? I think I'm very much within the time scale. So I think so. I just want to sort of conclude my talk about this Sendai framework, highlighting few points about what next. For example, I suppose it is very difficult to say what the next 5 years will bring. For example, in January, did I ever think that I will be working from home for 7 months? Not at all. So it is very difficult to predict what the future entails. So disasters depend greatly on so many intersecting factors: society of culture, socioeconomic, political, environmental, and so many other development factors. So as we all know, the world is currently within a pandemic, and as well as we all are experiencing other natural hazards, where politics, leadership, and decision making have a major say regarding prioritizing risk, and also depending on the countries. So for us to truly progress with disaster risk reduction approaches, more research and data collection needs to take place across parts of the society at both local and national level. And also it depends on the resources that are made available for each country to help drive national agendas in trying to meet these goals of the Sendai framework that I highlighted before. And also we all need to be working together on our unique challenges together to make impactful and meaningful change to meet the framework goals. This is where what I see as the future of Sendai at this five-year point. We have 10 more years to go, and these are some of the points that I want to emphasize. And to conclude my talk, we need to actually concentrate on systemic risk perspective also. For example, we must continue to develop and test the tools and approaches which needs informing broader development processes with systemic risk. We can't be taking risk on individual basis. We need to think about the systematic perspective and also cascading impacts. In my view, I think we have a great opportunity for future reflection and to better organize ourselves in our approach to risk with a high level of sophistication and integration. For example, what we are facing at the moment, the COVID-19, is a clear example of a risk that originates from an epidemic and possibly has a systemic impact in many sectors. So in that sense, we all need to be guiding governments to go beyond superficial coordination in their rollout of each national version of 2030 agenda and to achieve full integration. This is actually what these are some of the points from my wish list to put forward to you as next steps. Thank you very much for listening. That is what I want to highlight in terms of Sendai framework, its perceptions, its challenges, and the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for giving an insight view about this Sendai framework, about the targets and the priority action, and the relation with various sectors. Really, it's a wonderful. Now the session is open for a question answer. Then we will go ahead further. Okay, till time we get question in our chat box. And I have certain proposals for you, Professor Amaratunga. Are you listening me? I am audible to you?
Yeah, I'm listening, yes.
Okay. Actually, this program what we initiated on this International Day of Disaster Risk Reduction. Basically, we are thinking that how we can go ahead with collaboration with various industries. Okay. Number one, I think, and I will request you to please be available if possible for the next 5 days. We have invited various industrial experts rather than the leaders, those who are running their industry. We are thinking that how this Sendai framework can be implemented for the zero tolerance in the disaster risk management. That's our objective. And when we will go ahead in this direction, our intention is this, that students should have opportunity to take some work for further study and also for employment point of view. So these are the things behind which we thought this program. Meanwhile, I am starting getting some questions, so I would like to read Colonel Sanjay Srivastava's question and what he wrote it. I would like to read it. I think this question is like this or observation. Disaster management is multi-sector responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility, which at the time in no one's responsibility. How FDRR can make accountable DRR. Madam, this is for you.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's a good question. I think it helps me to maybe briefly touch base on the purpose of Sendai. So these are actually voluntary non-binding agreements put forward by the UN. So really speaking, in my view, these agreements need to be used as guiding documents at the country level, and they need to come up with national and local strategies, within which there need to be mechanisms, including governance and accountability. I think I totally agree with you, agreed with Sanjay here about accountability mechanisms. And there can be a lot of people who want to have authority, but when it comes to responsibility, nobody wants to take the responsibility. So it is actually at the national level, DRR plans very clearly need to identify who are accountable, and then that is why Sendai framework has the second priority, which is directly linked to disaster governance. So national strategies should have all this information very clearly highlighting who's responsible, who's accountable, who has the authority. So these are actually country level decisions, whereas the Sendai framework guides the countries to devise these principles. But of course, different countries actually have different systems. In that sense, the countries can actually take the key points from Sendai, and they really need to develop their own systems. Yeah, does it sound okay?
Yeah. Thank you, madam. I think Sanjay is happy, or do you want more clarification? Sanjay Srivastava, please let us know.
No.
Meanwhile,
No, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Karan sir. Now the next question is from Professor P.K. Joshi. He is asking about this data missing part. You know that in most of the cases, a lot of data are not available. What do you react on this? And the question is on the screen.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question. I think we all actually face at the moment, we are overloaded with data, but not with the right data. I think that is why it is really important. Even what type of data that you need, everything has to be linked to the National Disaster Management Strategy. So the National Disaster Management Strategy will identify what the priorities of the country are, and then what are the what needs achieving, and in order to achieve those, what actions need taking, and in order to make sure that these actions are taken, what are the measures? That is where data comes in. So there need to be a very systematic process in identifying in the first instance what type of data that we need. Yeah. So at the moment, what is happening is we collect all sorts of data from everywhere. So we all are overloaded with a lot of data, which really doesn't make any sense. I think we really need to go back to the drawing board, reflect on the national disaster management strategy at the country level, if this actually applicable to all countries, and then need to reflect about that timeline. What sort of data do we need in order to meet up these strategies, and making sure that we meet these targets and goals? I think there need to be a kind of a radical change in our thinking, in identifying what type of data that is needed. Because I think because of this lack of careful thinking, we end up in collecting all sort of data, maybe ones which are very useful and which are not that useful. And when all the data are bundled together, there's a very good chance that we will miss the very important data set also. So in that sense, it is really important that we identify what data is actually needed. Thank you.
One question came from, I think Professor Joshi. Is it okay what Professor Dilanthi has responded to your question?
Yeah, perfectly fine. In addition to that, you know, in large geographical areas, though they are counted as one administrative unit, but a very high degree of heterogeneity prevails. And with the prevailing heterogeneity, the indicators and variables might change. So, you know, having that as one of the criteria to see that we are actually collecting the correct amount and correct kind of data. Probably to me, that also matters a lot. I don't know if you have experienced the same thing. Please, over to you.
Yeah, I agree with you actually. So I think what you said is correct. I think, of course, this issue of data is actually very, very complicated, as I said. But having said that, again, you know, the needs of data needs to be directly linked to the national DRR strategies. Actually, yes. Thank you. Okay, so there's another question about inclusive approach. I think I totally agree with you. I think we need to understand, I suppose we talk about high-level national strategies, input of science and technology, and these all are at the top level, but we shouldn't forget what is happening at the grassroots level. So in that sense, I think having, I like this term which I use as localizing disaster knowledge. So I think that is localizing disaster science. It is really, really important that we get a really good understanding about what are the needs at the community level, so that we can actually have our national strategies and also the research agendas to reflect the needs at the grassroots level. For example, I mean, how better we can actually integrate science into disaster risk reduction policy, and also how we can actually create new knowledge that is reflective of the truth on the ground and directly beneficial local communities. I think that is very, very important. Otherwise, we will be talking about something else, and maybe at the community level, maybe we haven't understood the reality. I think that is a position where none of us want to be in. So in that sense, having this very good idea about truth on the ground is really important. For that, we need to have this inclusive approach to DRR and to work very closely with communities who actually face the ground reality. Thank you. Yeah, I think those are the questions. So I think any further points?
A very good, interesting question we got from Sharvin Patel.
Understanding the risk.
Hello.
Yeah, I can hear. Any more? I think that we have covered all the questions.
Yeah. One question probably. Have you covered this Sharvin Patel question? He is speaking about some chemical disaster, environmental consequences.
Give me a second.
Like severe climate changes and their. How do you respond to this Sharvin Patel question? Is it on your screen, ma'am?
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Please. How would you like to respond to this question? Because it is very interesting.
Yeah, I think again this is a very good example where we need to consider about integrated disasters or systematic risk. And again, in that sense, I suppose particularly the role of GIS and RS with real-time information will actually provide that that background. Again, I think this is directly linked to data. What type of data that are needed, and also capturing historic, because I identified the gaps in terms of the need to have correct data and also historical data. And also, I think as Dr. Patel highlights here, real life data, so real time data. So in that sense, I suppose there are different variables, and I agree with him. I suppose you know, real time data is really important, particularly in cases of not only in chemical and environmental disaster situations, and also natural hazards. For example, like you know, the tsunami prevention is very much to do with real-time data. As we speak, there are a lot of research and a lot of real-time monitoring is taking place behind the scenes in monitoring situations, earthquakes, volcanoes. So in that sense, the real-time data plays a major role in predicting what the future is like. Thank you.
Okay. Any other question from any one of the viewers, please? You can unmute your mic and you can ask if you have. Okay. No question. Okay, good. Ma'am, now we are on the concluding part. So I would like to acknowledge ma'am and the participant question answer. They were quite interesting. And I would like to say something as one of the moderator for today's event. When we go for disaster, it is my understanding that how many whatever countries have signed this MOU or the signatory with the UNDDR. Yesterday I was reading one report that only 27 or even less than I think less than 30 countries have or made an action plan for the marginalized population of their country. It's a big challenge, you know, because any type of disaster, whether it is a natural, whether it is a chemical, whether it is industrial, whether it is a nuclear, whether it is a volcanic, whether it is flood, you name anyone, and you see the marginalized population are having maximum impact. You will agree, all will agree. And to strengthen them, I would like to put these following points for the forum to think it and for further action in due course of time. Number one, how we can generate employment on the base of the local skill, so that that skill which is generated area specific, it should be like this, that in case of that area specific disaster, the employment will sustain. That is one part. Second part, if you see reports, whether they are X countries or Y countries, in number of reports, I understand that old man persons are not very well addressed. So we have to think it for this senior citizen. That is very important. And the third, which is very challenging nowadays, or it is since long past also, this migratory population is facing lot of issues at the time of disaster, and even in this pandemic time. If you see, in pandemic time, this migratory workers faced a lot of things. I think for all of us, this is an opportunity through this platform that we can initiate some type of work, either in terms of project or some making some policy development to the government, whether state or central government. And here, through this platform, I would like to request Professor Dilanthi Amaratunga, that in India, we are having Disaster Management Act 2005. Okay, I think this act is very robust act. And in this act, there are some scope of working for the state government and national government. And uh, for taking action in the line of Disaster Management Act, I would like to establish and put up a thought before you, because you are there in the Global Disaster Resilience Center. And here we are having JNU and other institutions, academic as well as professional institutions, that how we can establish certain networking for further doing work in this direction, so that employment should be generated, and apart from the employment, we should have certain or some policy for the future. This is one point. So I would like to your observation on this point which I said it. Then I will go for the second point, and then we will conclude it.
I think you put forward a really good point. I think I totally agree with you. Of course, Sendai framework during the last 5 years, of course, 187 countries actually signed the agreement of, but of course, very few countries actually have national disaster management strategies, and even fewer countries actually have done any data and any reflection on their strategies. So really speaking, I think it is actually, these are some of the key points that are coming forward, even linking with International Disaster Risk Reduction Day, which is actually today, urging the governments, the countries to have their own national plans. Of course, within the national plans, there need to be representation of all stakeholders, and of course, including the marginalized populations. I think that is one of the other good points about Sendai, is that it talks about having integration among all stakeholders. So stakeholders are not only the service providers, but stakeholders are also the stakeholders are also the people who will be benefiting from these systems. So in that sense, their situations need to be incorporated into these plans. So I agree with you, but I suppose at the end of the day, it's just the role that the states have to play in terms of devising national DRR strategies to reflect their country's situation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I agree with your points. Yes.
Yeah. And second point, I think all of you agree that we have done, we means we all globally, okay, all important countries or the stakeholders, they have done marvelous job on the side of the natural disaster, whether it is a cyclone, flood, earthquake. But I understand on the man-made disaster side, lot of things need to be done, especially to address the 7 targets, how we can reduce the mortality, how we can, uh, reduce the morbidity like that, how we can increase the good governance like that. Uh, and uh, apart from this, the 4 priority actions are also missing on that part. So I would like to uh, recommend that on man-made disaster side also the same type of work is needed. And I understand Professor Amaratunga will agree with me that lot of work need to be done on man-made disaster side.
Certainly, I fully agree with you on that, because I think particularly with the man-made side of it, I think the issue is, I think also including conflicts. I think these things can be politically sensitive topics across countries and in that global setting. So people are a bit reluctant to talk about them. I think I see that as a major barrier. For example, like, okay, so at the moment we are talking about natural hazards with biological hazards. So there's a lot of momentum on the COVID, but is this going to, and also at the same time, there are a lot of sort of wars, conflicts, all these things are going on, but we don't talk about those. And if there's going to be a natural hazard with those, what are we going to do? It doesn't actually create that level of interest, either at the media interest or I think in my view, I think a lot of people just do not want to create any tension or to be making politically sensitive statements, because it's just it can well be it can well lead people to be in in hot water. I think that is the issue. But having said that, there are people who actually concentrate on that. But having said that, again, I put the responsibility back to the national governments. They really need to reflect on what the actual situation of the countries are, because of course I think, you know, maybe apart from one or two countries in the world, I don't think that there are any countries where there are no conflicts that are in place at the moment. So, but having said that, the national DRR plans do not have any reference whatsoever. So I totally agree with you. I suppose, you know, but again, the countries need to be facing the reality and to sort of acknowledge the issues that they face, be it natural hazards, man-made hazards, war, conflicts, or biological hazards. And their disaster management plans should reflect this reality, really. Yes. Thank you.
So with all these things, ma'am, thanks for sharing your time. And I hope that you will also spare some time in next 5 days, remaining 5 days. And we will welcome your questions, whatever you will have during the session. And before concluding, I would like to thank HealthCrum, our partner. They have done very hard work for putting all these things at one place, making this virtual things in reality. I would like to also thank CropC, that is basically a organization which is working for the lightning issue in the time of monsoon. So with all these, I would like to thank all partners, all viewers, all supporters, and those who listened it and put the questions before us. Uh, Thank you all, and we will continue this event for the next 5 days. Thank you all.